Okay, welcome to part 2 of our bureaucracy lecture. We are going to pick up with policy implementation and policy creation. This is going to cover what makes the bureaucracy a sub-government or the fourth branch, but also kind of a separate entity, that sub-government, because they do seem to do all three powers of the branches that a government would have. So first, let's talk about the definition here of policy implementation. This means bureaucratic discretion, meaning the bureaucracy gets to have a say in how policy is implemented, and they get to determine what that means. When we talk about policy creation and policy implementation, they get the discretion on what do these words actually mean, and that can change from administration to administration. All right, next, they have the power to enforce federal law. They are part of the executive branch, okay? So this is the executive power that they hold. They have to enforce this federal law that has been passed. That's their job. And so they have to do that. So that is one way they're going to do that policy implementation, is they're going to enforce it. They're going to go out and ensure that the people that they're overseeing, whether it's agriculture or environmental groups or manufacturers for environment, immigration, those sorts of things, that the law is being followed by those groups. Next is going to be your issue administrative regulations, which means they are doing legislative power. This is called quasi-legislative power, and they get to make regulations. Yes, this is a law that they are enforcing, but they have to flesh this law out. Congress made it vague for various reasons, and so now it's on the bureaucratic agency to part of in that enforcement, part of that implementation is they've got to flesh it out. Congress says we reduce pollution by 20%. The EPA has to figure out, what does that look like? How is that going to happen? Are we going to reward people? Are we going to reward government, like businesses and other agencies, to do things to reduce their pollution output, or are we going to fine people who continue to pump out a lot of pollutants, or when they pollute a river or groundwater or the ground in general, are we going to fine them? So they have to make those regulations to determine how we're going to meet the goal of the law passed by Congress. That's quasi-legislative. And then they're going to enforce administrative regulations. So they have to enforce them. So they have to enforce the federal law initially, and they're going to do that through quasi-legislative and then enforcement of those regulations that they have passed. And then finally, they're going to interpret and apply administrative regulations. So now they're going to act as judge, as a court system, so quasi-judicial. They're going to implement, and they're going to look at people and say, you did not follow this regulation that we have created and established to help enforce this law that we have been directed to enforce by the president, and it was passed by Congress. So you haven't followed these regulations that we've passed. That means, though, anyone can, if they find somebody for violation of a regulation they passed, it can go to an actual court system, and they can decide whether or not that regulation is constitutional, allowed, within the bounds of the Constitution and the law. And then they do administrative tribunals. So not only are they going to say, you have violated it, but they can also hold hearings on determining whether or not someone violated that regulation. So it's not just a fine per se, but they can hold a type of court. Now, all of this can move into the official court system, and the courts, the official federal courts, can determine whether or not the actions of the bureaucratic agency were justified within the letter of the law. Now, rationale for bureaucratic policy making. So why do we allow them to kind of have these powers? Speed. Okay. The speed that they can get done. If we rely on Congress to make all of these regulations that need to be done to enforce the law, nothing would ever get done. I mean, the lawmaking process is slow on purpose. It's a check on both houses, and so abuse of power. This allows, so implementation of the law can be much faster than waiting on Congress. They have technical expertise. These are people who have, the people who are in going in and putting these regulations out there, they are lifelong bureaucrats. They have been there for years. They don't change with administrative changes and those sorts of things. So the technical expertise that they have is unmatched. They understand, first off, they know what has been tried and what won't work. Two, they have the knowledge of the industry. Because interest groups are giving it to them, or they just have it because that's their expertise and that's what they've learned to go out and learned more about. A political expediency. So it's much easier for the president to issue an executive order and the bureaucratic agency to carry them out. So what are the politics? What do we want? So things do change, and rules and goals of the administration, of the presidential administration, might change. And the interpretation that the president has of the process for the United States to move forward might change. The bureaucracy allows them to go much faster and get it done. Now, the bureaucracy and the other institutions, we've talked about how there's this legislative oversight, but what does the bureaucracy do when it comes to other agencies or the other institutions? When it comes to the presidency, obviously the presidency is going to check the bureaucratic power by appointing administrative heads and firing them, directing them on how to implement certain policies through executive orders or through signing statements on bills. But on the other hand, the bureaucracy is going to look at the presidency and be like, you only thought you were in charge. We're the ones running this show, because the president cannot be 100% present in every single aspect of all of these agencies. Okay, so the bureaucracy is going to promote their own agenda, and oftentimes a lot of them the president's going to ignore, and that gives them free reign to do what they need to do. So yes, the president has some checks on there, but the bureaucracy looks at them and says, you can't control all of this. You can't focus on all of this, because if you try, you're not going to have enough energy to do that all. So the president typically focuses on certain ones, the big ones: Treasury, State, Defense, Justice, and some of the others like Department of Interior or, the EPA, the Bureau of Land Management, kind of get to go on their own and do their own thing. The OMB is kind of the spokesperson for the president. I mean, this is the Office of Management and Budget. They're the ones who are controlling the budget. They're the ones who are proposing a budget for every agency to Congress. So the bureaucracy does have to play nice with the OMB a little bit, but essentially those bureaucratic agencies can go straight to various congressional committees as well and talk with them about their budget if they need to. But the OMB is going to be tracking the money of all of these agencies. With Congress, so Congress can check the bureaucracy through the appointment power, through jurisdiction, through oversight. We've talked about that with the legislative oversight, but the appointment, they have to approve those appointments. With various laws that they pass of what they can and cannot do. That's checking the power of the bureaucracy. But once again, and they're going to use the CBO and the GAO to do that. But once again, the bureaucracy is going to look at Congress and be like, you think you're in charge, but really, we know more than you. We know more than you about this area, because congressmen have to be knowledgeable. And yes, they might get kind of knowledgeable in one area, but they still have to be aware of all the others. Agencies are just focused on one, and they're like, we're going to know more than you. The interest groups are going to be working with those bureaucratic agencies very, very closely. They're going to be sharing information back and forth. So they're really tight. And so, yeah, you think you're in control, Congress, but we've got all this information. And you know what? Maybe we won't share it with you. Maybe we'll go native or, unaware, and maybe Congress will be unaware that an agency has been captured by the interest group. Now, bureaucratic accountability. So how are they accountable? So to whom is the bureaucracy accountable? All right. Who does bureaucracy have to answer to, for all things? First, it's got to be Congress, obviously. I mean, Congress controls their money. Congress will do oversight hearings. Anytime anything goes wrong, they will be pulled into hearings. They will be subpoenaed and have to testify before Congress. So they are accountable to Congress because Congress is passing the laws, and Congress is the ones who have to respond to citizens' demands. They also are accountable to the presidency. In this case, the president appoints and or removes. Yes, Congress has to appoint them or approve them, but the president ultimately has to pick them first and then remove them. He can remove them from office. So he can reorganize departments if he wants to. He can change the budget, reduce the budget. He can do all these requests of Congress. Congress can go along with it or not. He can ignore initiatives that they want to do. He can issue executive orders that totally limit what the bureaucracy was wanting to do, and that holds them accountable. They're accountable to the public. Okay, the public gets fed up with something, they'll call for a change, and they will call their congressman. They will look at interest groups to pressure this change. They are, the red tape that gets generated from bureaucratic agencies oftentimes, because they have these layers upon layers of trying to implement all these laws, it creates red tape, like go to this line and then go to that line, those sorts of things. That gets too frustrating. The public will then reach out to their elected officials and say, we demand a change. We demand something better. And then they're also accountable to special interest groups. Special interest groups give them research, give them information, help them understand the data, provide information to Congress when it comes to budget. So they're accountable to these special interest groups. If they are not working with those special interest groups will go find somewhere else that will be listened to. So, the bureaucratic agencies have to listen to those special interest groups, especially because special interest groups are talking to Congress as well, and they're representing the citizens. And then really no one or only itself. They're going to be accountable to themselves. It could be seen as they're accountable to no one, or, no one is holding them accountable. The president is ignoring them. Congress is too busy doing other things, or things are falling through the cracks. They're not aware that an agency has been captured, or they're going native, those type of things. And in that case, eventually when those things come out, then there's this big demand for reform in that industry and a realigning of agencies. We saw this post 9/11 with reorganization of cabinet departments, where things were missed, and so they reorganized because no one was being held accountable for the information that they had. All right, so that's the end of part 2 for your bureaucracy lecture. If you have any questions, let me know, and don't forget, don't do anything too stupid. Bye, guys.